Is everyone around you talking about the beauty of Taylor Swift's lyrics, but you don't know where to start? Is everyone around you talking about diction and syntax, but you don't even know what's going on? Hi, I'm Dr. Clay Zuba, inventor of Zubify. If you want to talk and write about your favorite song lyrics and literature, diction and syntax are a great place to start. I'll explain what they are and how to use and identify them coming up next. If you are anything like me, you love talking about your favorite songs, poems, and novels and literature with your friends and family. But in order to communicate effectively about what you like and see, you need to develop a strategy and a vocabulary. It's just a fact of life. If you're not sure where to start, diction and syntax are a great place. That's because diction and syntax are the building blocks of all the literary devices and rhetorical choices that you might want to talk about or write about. Put simply, diction is word choice and syntax is word arrangement, because in writing and literature, it's all about the words. Diction and syntax work together to create the tone, which is the attitude of the speaker toward the listener. You might not realize it, but you think about tone a lot when someone talks to you because you want to understand their attitude toward you. For example, if someone talks to you with short sentences and there's a lot of implied exclamation marks, you might think they're angry at you or very upset. From the foundation of diction and tone, we can then start to talk about everything else. Let's talk about diction first. Diction is not just about the denotation or the dictionary definition, but the connotation of the words that you're reading and choosing. For example, think about the word home. The word home really just kind of means the primary residence where you live, but it also has all kinds of connotations. It's the place where your family is, it's the place where your room is, and all your posters, and all your animal friends, and your favorite pillows. There's an implied sense of emotional comfort with the word home that goes beyond the meaning of primary residence. Think about the difference in meaning between cheap and frugal. If we call someone cheap or frugal, we're basically saying that they make a lot of decisions based on the cost of things. But if you say someone is cheap, you're kind of making a moral judgment about them, that there's something negative about them. But if you say someone is frugal, you're complimenting them for their choices. This is what the connotation is all about. Diction also takes the forms of vivid language, like the kind that you would use to create imagery or word choices that evoke sensual perception. Think about the difference between frigid and cold. Frigid is vivid language. Cold is just vague. Diction is also the underlying strategy in all the comparative literary devices that you know and like similes, metaphors, and analogy. Diction is the foundation of personification, which was when a writer applies human attributes to non-human objects or people. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, when Shakespeare says, "Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she." That's personification because both the moon and sun are being given the attributes of a human. Diction is the underlying strategy of allusion, which is when an author makes a reference to a work outside of that work that you're studying. For example, in Anne Bradstreet's poem Verses Upon the Burning of Our House, when she writes, "I blessed his name that gave and took," she's making an allusion to Job 121, where it says, "The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away." All of these that I just mentioned are strategies that rely on word choice to communicate with the reader. Today, as I film, I'm lucky enough to have two helpers. I have the Licky Boy, who's helping me from the white credenza. He's really helping. And I've got my background helper, Baby Snuggles, who's helping me from the top of the bookshelf. Hopefully both of them will stick around and help me make an excellent video for you today. We'll all do our best. So let's talk about syntax or word arrangement. For example, the sentence types that a writer chooses are a form of syntax. Long sentences, short sentences, simple sentences, compound complex sentences, imperative sentences, interrogative sentences, periodic sentences, all the kinds of sentences that you know and love are forms of syntax. Punctuation is also a form of syntax. Question marks, commas, exclamation points are all types of syntax that have an impact on the writing and literature that you read. Sound devices are all also a form of syntax. For example, rhyming, whether that be internal or external rhyme, is a form of syntax. Alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginnings of words. Assonance, which is the repetition of vowel sounds close to each other in a sentence. Onomatopoeia, yes, which is when a word sounds like it looks like the word boom is also a form of syntax. Often literary works can be extremely dense in syntax. For example, Poe's line in The Raven, "In the sad, silken, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me," contains alliteration in the words silken and sad, assonance in the words purple and curtain, and it also includes onomatopoeia with the word rustling, which sounds a little bit like the rustling of leaves when you say it. I'd also like to hone in on 3 forms of syntax that are particularly important, but my students kind of get it wrong sometimes. One of these is parallelism, which is the repetition of grammatical structures within the same sentence or in sentences very close together. For example, in Frederick Douglass's narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, when he writes, "He was cruel enough to inflict the harshest punishment, artful enough to descend to the lowest trickery, and obdurate enough to be insensible to the voice of reproving conscience." This is an example of parallelism because of the repetition of the grammatical structures between the commas. Antithesis is exactly like parallelism in the sense that it repeats grammatic structures, but there's also kind of a switcheroo in terms of the placement in some of the words that creates an opposition in the meanings of the clauses. One of the most famous examples of these is in JFK's famous inaugural address when he writes, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." JFK used this structure to emphasize the importance of an individual's commitment to their country and the error one makes in thinking only about themselves and what their country can do for them. Many of my students also confuse juxtaposition with antithesis. They're a lot alike, but juxtaposition is not antithesis. Antithesis relies on the reversal of words within the same grammatical structures, but juxtaposition doesn't require a reversal of the same words, it just requires the use of words with divergent meanings close to each other. One of the most famous examples of juxtaposition is the opening lines of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, when Dickens writes, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom and the age of foolishness." You can see the way best and worst and wisdom and foolishness have different meanings, and Dickinson places them close together for literary effect. Taken in Taken individually, the literary devices that I've just listed can seem kind of esoteric and maybe kind of useless. But if you think about it, diction and syntax are going on all the time in all the great works of literature that you read and that you listen to. Let's take 2 examples. The first being Taylor Swift's song, "Anti-Hero." Taylor says, "When my depression works in the graveyard shifts, all the people I've ghosted stand there in the room." She's using syntax when she places ghosted and graveyard shift next to each other, because ghosts a lot of times are in a graveyard because they're both associated with death. However, she's relying on diction when she uses the word ghosted because there's a double meaning or double entendre to the word ghosted. The ghost on one hand is something that haunts you, but when she's talking about ghosting, I think she's also talking about the way that sometimes you just don't text somebody back. With this strategy, I think she's implying that she's haunted by her actions when she didn't text people back or call them back, and she ruined her relationships. Taylor continues with the lines, "I should not be left to my own devices. They come with prices and vices. I end up in crisis. A tale as old as time. I wake up screaming from dreaming. One day I'll watch as you're leaving, 'cause you've got tired of skeeving for the last time." You're probably all already noticing a lot of rhyming in these lines, both internal rhyming and external rhyming. We can see a use of diction in the word scheming, because someone who schemes is somebody who really just kind of thinks about their actions a lot ahead of time. But when we use the word scheme, there's a connotation of someone who's kind of like a criminal mastermind or a villain who wants to harm others. Taylor continues, "I'll stare directly at the sun, but never in the mirror. It must be exhausting, always rooting for the anti-hero." Now we see why she's using all this language about ghosts and graveyards and scheming, because she's constructing herself as someone who has the qualities of an antagonist in a work of literature, but with whom we would identify. She emphasizes this by using the words rooting for, constructing a similarity between herself and her audience, because her audience is a lot of young people who like to root for each other and like to be rooted for, because they really rely on others to help them with their self-esteem, and the phrase rooting for is casual language used by young people. Taylor continues, saying, "Sometimes I feel like everybody is a sexy baby, and I'm a monster on the hill, too big to hang out, slowly lurching toward your favorite city, pierced through the heart, but never killed." I see a lot of diction choice in this stanza. The word sexy baby, I don't really know why she did that, but I feel like it must have been a diction choice, because sexy and baby are words that create juxtaposition. You shouldn't think of a baby as being sexy. These meanings are divergent. When Taylor says she's a monster on the hill, lurching toward your favorite city, she's kind of, I think, implying an allusion toward a monster like Godzilla, which walks around and wrecks cities. The word lurching is a vivid verb choice because monsters tend to lurch. They don't walk gracefully. And when Taylor uses the phrase pierce through the heart, she's making an allusion to Dracula. Or, if I know Taylor, she's making an allusion to all the versions of vampires in popular culture that she might think that her listeners would know about, even if they haven't read Dracula. Let's look at one more and a slightly more dense example. This is an excerpt from Ralph Ellison's essay on bird watching, and jazz. In order to kind of understand this, you kind of have to understand that he's writing about a jazz musician named Charlie Parker, whose nickname happened to be Bird. You should maybe pause this video a second so you could read this slide. And if you've never listened to jazz, particularly a song by Charlie Parker, you can even listen to a song by Charlie Parker while you pause the video. You can probably see immediately that Ellison is using diction to create an extended analogy where he compares Charlie Parker to certain types of birds. He uses the terms mimic thrushes, the catbird, the brown thrasher. All of these are types of birds that play off the nickname of Charlie Parker. We can see some juxtaposition when Ellison places the word virtuosi, which is kind of a formal, complicated vocabulary word, next to words like tricksters and conmen. And there's also a juxtaposition because virtuosi, or people who are really good at playing instruments, are something to be admired, whereas tricksters and conmen are not. Parker continues his strategy of juxtaposition when he places confidence man and practical joker next to each other. Both a confidence man and a practical joker are people who deceive other people or don't always tell them the truth. But a confidence man has a negative connotation because a confidence man is someone who harms others by taking their money. But a practical joker is somebody who just likes to play amusing but harmless tricks. We can see an abundance of syntax choices as this same sentence continues. As Parker writes, they take off on the songs of other birds, inflating, inverting, and turning them wrong side out, and are capable of driving a prowling square cat wild. Utterly irreverent and romantic, they are not beyond bugging human beings. Here we can see an abundance of alliteration, of assonance. We can see a great variation in sentence structure and the structure of clauses, kind of like the way jazz music itself is irregular and kind of all over the place, yet harmonious. We can see a diction choice in the phrase take off, because on one hand, Ellison is saying that Charlie Parker's music can be derivative and build on the work of other musicians. But on the other hand, it takes off like a bird takes off in flight. We can see the same thing going on with the phrase utterly irreverent and romantic, which relies on repetition of these sounds and the use of the R sound. And we can see another double entendre in the use of the word bugging, because on one hand, he's just saying that Charlie Parker's music can annoy people who don't really understand it, like when someone bugs someone else. But at the same time, bugs are something that birds eat. So there's something a little threatening here to Parker's music. And I think this also connects to Ellison's use of the word square, because a square is someone who wouldn't understand and therefore be bothered by Parker. As you can see from our study of Taylor Swift and Ralph Ellison, diction and syntax truly are the building blocks of all of the literary devices and rhetorical choices that we just discussed in their works. When you want to analyze a work, start with diction and syntax, because then at least it's a basis for you to start thinking whether or not what you're seeing and what is interesting you is based on word choice or word arrangement. And from there, you can start to narrow down your choices so you can describe what you're seeing. I hope that this video has helped you think about how to write and communicate about writing and literature with others. Thanks for watching Zubify. Come back for more Zubify.